An excerpt from the Autobiography of Dr. Maya Angelou. I know why the caged bird sings. For nearly a year, I supped around the house, the store, the school, and the church like an old biscuit, dirty and inedible. Then I met, or rather got to know, the lady who threw me my first lifeline. Mrs. Bertha Flowers was the aristocrat of black stamps. She had the grace of control to appear warm in the coldest weather, and on the Arkansas summer days, it seemed she had a private breeze which swirled around, cooling her. She was thin, without the taut look of wiry people, and her printed, voiled dresses and flowered hats were as right for her as denim overalls on a farmer. She was our side's answer to the richest white woman in town. Her skin was a rich black that would have peeled like a plum if snagged. But then, no one would have thought of getting close enough to Mrs. Flowers to ruffle her dress, let alone snag her skin. She didn't encourage familiarity. She wore gloves, too. I don't think I ever saw Mrs. Flowers laugh, but she smiled often. A slow widening of her thin black lips to show even, small white teeth, then the slow, effortless closing. When she chose to smile on me, I always wanted to thank her. The action was so graceful and inclusively benign. She was one of the few gentlewomen I've ever known, and has remained throughout my life the measure of what a human being can be. Mama had a strange relationship with her. Most often, when she passed down the road in front of the store, she spoke to Mama in that soft yet carrying voice. "Good day, Mrs. Henderson." Mama responded with, "How are you, Sister Flowers?" Mrs. Flowers didn't belong to our church, nor was she Mama's familiar. Why on earth did she insist on calling her Sister Flowers? Shame made me want to hide my face. Mrs. Flowers deserved better than to be called sister. Then Mama left out the verb. Why not ask, "How are you, Mrs. Flowers?" With the unbalanced passion of the young, I hated her for showing her ignorance to Mrs. Flowers. It didn't occur to me for many years that they were as alike as sisters, separated only by formal education. Although I was upset, neither of the women was in the least shaken by what I thought was an unceremonious greeting. Mrs. Flowers would continue her easy gait up the hill to her little bungalow, and Mama kept on shelling peas or doing whatever had brought her out to the front porch. Occasionally, though, Mrs. Flowers would drift off the road and down to the store, and Mama would say to me, "Sister, you go on and play." As I left, I would hear the beginning of an intimate conversation. Mama persistently using the wrong verb, or none at all. "Brother and Sister Wilcox is surely the meanest." "Is, Mama? Is? Oh, please not is, Mama, for two or more." But they talked, and from the side of the building where I waited for the ground to open up and swallow me, I heard the soft voice of Mrs. Flowers and the textured voice of my grandmother, merging and melting. They were interrupted from time to time by giggles that must have come from Mrs. Flowers. Mama never giggled in her life. Then she was gone. She appealed to me because she was like people I'd never met personally, like women in English novels who walked the moors, whatever they were, with their loyal dogs racing at a respectful distance, like the women who sat in front of roaring fires, drinking tea incessantly from silver trays full of scones and crumpets, women who walked over the heath and read Morocco-bound notebooks and had two last names divided by a hyphen. It would be safe to say that she made me proud to be a Negro, just by being herself. She acted as refined as white folks in the movies and books, and she was more beautiful, for none of them could have come near that warm color without looking gray by comparison. It was fortunate that I never saw her in the company of poor white folks, for since they tend to think of their whiteness as an evenizer, I'm certain that I would have had to hear her spoken to commonly as Bertha, and my image of her would have been shattered like the unmendable Humpty Dumpty. One summer afternoon, sweet milk fresh in my memory, she stopped at the store to buy provisions. Another Negro woman of her health and age would have been expected to carry the paper sacks home in one hand, but Mama said, Sister Flowers, I'll send Bailey up to your house with those things. She smiled that slow, dragging smile and said, Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I'd prefer Marguerite, though. My name was beautiful when she said it. I've been meaning to talk to her anyway. They gave each other age group looks. Mama said, Well, that's all right then. Sister, go and change your dress. You're going to Sister Flowers. The chiffrobe was a maze. What on earth did one put on to go to Mrs. Flowers' house? I knew I shouldn't put on a Sunday dress. It might be sacrilegious. Certainly not a house dress, since I was already wearing a fresh one. I chose a school dress, naturally. It was formal, without suggesting that going to Mrs. Flowers' house was the equivalent of attending church. I trusted myself back into the store. Now, don't you look nice? I'd chosen the right thing for once. Mrs. Henderson, you make most of the children's clothes, don't you? Yes, ma'am, sure do. Store-bought clothes ain't hardly worth the thread it take to stitch 'em. I'll say you do a lovely job, though. So neat. That dress looks professional. Mama was enjoying the seldom received compliments. Since everyone we knew, except Mrs. Flowers, of course, could sew competently, praise was rarely handed out for the commonly practiced craft. I try, with the help of the Lord, Sister Flowers, to finish the inside just like I does the outside. Come here, sister. I'd buttoned up the collar and tied the belt, apron-like, in the back. Mama told me to turn around. With one hand, she pulled the strings and felt the belt fell free at both sides of my waist. Then her large hands were at my neck, opening the button loops. I was terrified. What was happening? Take it off, sister. She had her hands on the hem of the dress. Oh, I don't need to see the inside, Mrs. Henderson. I can tell. But the dress was over my head and my arms were stuck in the sleeves. Mama said, That'll do. See here, Sister Flowers. I French seams around the armholes. Through the cloth film, I saw the shadow approach. That makes it last longer. Children these days would bust out of sheet metal clothes. They so rough. This is a very good job, Mrs. Henderson. You should be proud. You can put your dress back on, Marguerite. No, ma'am, pride is a sin, and according to the good book, it goeth before a fall. That's right. So the Bible says. It's a good thing to keep in mind. I wouldn't look at either of them. Mama hadn't thought that taking off my dress in front of Mrs. Flowers would kill me stone dead. If I'd refused, she would have thought I was trying to be womanish and might have remembered St. Louis. Mrs. Flowers had known that I would be embarrassed, and that was even worse. I picked up the groceries and went outside to wait in the hot sunshine. It would be fitting if I got a sunstroke and died before they came out. Just dropped dead on the slanting porch. There was a little path beside the rocky road, and Mrs. Flowers walked in front, swinging her arms and picking her way over the stones. She said, without turning her head to me, I hear you're doing very good schoolwork, Marguerite, but that it's all written. The teachers report they have trouble getting you to talk in class. We passed the triangular farm on our left, and the path widened to allow us to walk together. I hung back in the separate, unasked, and unanswerable questions. Come and walk along with me, Marguerite. I couldn't have refused, even if I wanted to. She pronounced my name so nicely. Or, more correctly, she spoke each word with such clarity that I was certain a foreigner who didn't understand English could have understood her. Now, no one is going to make you talk. Possibly no one can. But bear in mind, language is man's way of communicating with his fellow man, and it is language alone which separates him from the lower animals. That was a totally new idea to me, and I need a little time to think about it. Your grandmother says you read a lot, every chance you get. That's good, but not enough. Words mean more than what is set down on paper. It takes the human voice to infuse them with the shades of deeper meaning. I memorized the part about the human voice infusing words. It seemed so valid and poetic. She said she was going to give me some books and that I must not only read them, I must read them aloud. She suggested that I try to make a sentence sound in as many different ways as possible. I'll accept no excuse if you return a book to me that has been badly handled. My imagination boggled at the punishment I would deserve if in fact I did abuse a book of Miss Flowers. Death would be too kind and too brief. The odors in her house surprised me. Somehow I never connected Mrs. Flowers with food or eating or any other common experience of common people. There must have been an outhouse, too, but my mind never recorded it. The sweet scent of vanilla had met us as she opened the door. I made tea cookies this morning. You see, I'd planned to invite you for cookies and lemonade so we could have this little chat. The lemonade's in the icebox. It followed this Mrs. Flowers would have ice on an ordinary day, when most families in our town bought ice late on Saturdays, only a few times during the summer, to be used in the wooden ice cream freezers. She took the bags from me and disappeared through the kitchen door. I looked around the room that I had never in my wildest fantasies imagined I would see. Brown photographs leered or threatened from the walls, and the white, freshly done curtains pushed against themselves and against the wind. I wanted to gobble up the entire room and take it to Bailey, who would help me analyze and enjoy it. Have a seat, Marguerite, over there by the table. She carried a platter covered with a tea towel. Although she warned that she hadn't tried her hand at baking sweets for some time, I was certain, like everything else about her, the cookies would be perfect. They were flat, round wafers, slightly browned on the edges, and butter yellow in the center. With the cold lemonade, they were sufficient for childhood's lifelong diet. Remembering my manners, I took nice little ladylike bites off the edges. She said she had made them expressly for me and that she had a few in the kitchen so that I could take them home to my brother. So I jammed one whole cake in my mouth, and the rough crumbs scratched the insides of my jaws. And if I hadn't had to swallow, it would have been a dream come true. As I ate, she began the first of what we later called my lessons in living. She said that I must always be intolerant of ignorance, but understanding of illiteracy. That some people, unable to go to school, were more educated and even more intelligent than college professors. She encouraged me to listen carefully to what country people called mother wit. That in those homely sayings was couched the collective wisdom of generations. When I finished the cookies, she brushed off the table and brought a thick, small book from the bookcase. I'd read A Tale of Two Cities and found it up to my standards as a romantic novel. She opened the first page, and I heard poetry for the first time in my life. It was the best of times and the worst of times. Her voice slid in and curved down through and over the words. She was nearly singing. I wanted to look at the pages. Were they the same that I had read, or were there notes, music, lined on the pages, like in a hymn book? Her sounds began cascading gently. I knew from listening to 1,000 preachers that she was nearing the end of her reading, and I hadn't really heard to understand a single word. How do you like that? It occurred to me that she expected a response. The sweet vanilla flavor was still on my tongue, and her reading was a wonder in my ears. I had to speak. I said, "Yes, ma'am." It was the least I could do, but it was the most also. There's one more thing. Take this book of poems and memorize one for me. Next time you pay me a visit, I want you to recite. I have tried often to search behind the sophistication of years for their enchantment I found so easily in those gifts. The essence escapes, but its aura remains. To be allowed, no, invited into the private lives of strangers, and to share their joys and fears, was a chance to exchange the southern bitter wormwood for a cup of mead with Beowulf, or a hot cup of tea and milk with Oliver Twist. When I said aloud, "It is a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done," tears of love filled my eyes and my selfhood. selflessness. On that first day, I ran down the hill and into the road. Few cars ever came along it, and had the good sense to stop running before I reached the store. I was liked, and what a difference it made. I was respected, not as Mrs. Henderson's grandchild or Bailey's sister, but just for being Marguerite Johnson. Childhood's logic never asks to be proved. All conclusions are absolute. I didn't question why Mrs. Flowers had singled me out for attention, nor did it occur to me that Mama might have asked her to give me a talking to. All I cared about was that she had made tea cookies for me and read to me from her favorite book. It was enough to prove that she liked me. Mama and Bailey were waiting inside the store. He said, "My, what did she give you?" He had seen the books, but I held the paper sack with his cookies in my arms, shielded by the poems. Mama said, "Sister, I know you acted like a little lady. That do my heart good to see settled people take to you all. I'm trying my best, the Lord knows, but these days..." Her voice trailed off. "Go in and change your dress."